welcome back Dr. Jonathan Paradise to share with us his timely thoughts during Hanukkah on the Holocaust and beliefs about God through the voice of modern Hebrew poetry. He's the right person to do this, having received his PhD in Ancient Near Eastern Studies and Biblical Studies from the University of Pennsylvania. Later, he established the program in Hebrew Studies at the University of Minnesota, where he taught courses on the Bible in the context of ancient Near East, Hebrew language and literature, and occasionally courses on Judaism. From 1989 to 2014, he was a visiting professor of Jewish studies in the Philosophy and Religion Department at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, where he taught courses on the Holocaust, the Bible, and Judaism. Jonathan retired from the University of Minnesota in 2003. He spends his time now doing voluntary teaching, translating Hebrew poetry, and writing software to support his Hebrew textbook, The Key to Modern Hebrew. So welcome, Jonathan. Can't wait to hear what you have to tell.
Thank you, Kate. I realized that I didn't switch it back to the right page that you wanted that.
Yeah, I do. What's this?
Let's see if this stays down. Is that okay? I think we might need to do a sound check.
Check, one.
Right, exactly. Just want to make sure we got the right volume for the recording.
Okay, is that okay?
Oh yeah, good.
I think I have too much material. Becky has promised to signal me when I've gotten far enough.
I'll leave that to Shin.
I'll stand up.
Arguing with God is a Jewish tradition that is as old as Abraham. He challenges God regarding God's decision to destroy Sodom because of the wickedness of the population. What if there are some righteous people in Sodom, demands Abraham. Will the judge of the entire earth not behave justly? Throughout Jewish history, disastrous events have produced poetic responses that you might find startling, some even blasphemous. Since the destruction of European Jewry, the Holocaust was the worst event in all Jewish history. It is easy to find poems that reflect on these horrific events, and I have brought a few of them to read with you today. I probably have brought more than time will allow for, so I want to plunge right in and do as many as I can. I've placed a screen showing the poet ahead of the screen that shows the poem. That will allow me to not speak about the poet's biography. So your job is to read about Moshe Dor while I continue talking. And if at some points during this presentation you want to participate, make comments and so on, that's fine. So, here's the poem. Does David still play before you? Does David still play before you with golden harp? And Solomon, does he still spin those fox fables in your ears? And in what field does Elijah ascend with chariot and horses of fire? You see, he's going through the Bible with different stories here. And Ezekiel, which wing strikes him? With what creature does he grapple in the flashing turbulence? And amid clouds of incense, is that face paler than any cloud of rising smoke? Jesus with a yellow star, still seeking to forgive and love? And from what wild, unruly scriptures of stars that are born and fade are you groping with hands of hardened arteries to tear out with remorse the unfulfilled promises? So, let's do this a little bit together. Does David still play before you? Who is the you that the poet is talking about? What do you think?
The reader?
Yes. You think it's God?
Yeah.
Yes, and why do you think it's God?
It's capitalized.
With a capital Y.
Smart.
Except, yes, that's good. Except that Hebrew doesn't have capital letters.
Oh.
So the question is, why did the translator, who is standing here, decide to hit the shift key and make it a capital Y? And yes, shift.
What's the Hebrew word? What Hebrew word is used for you?
Oh, the Hebrew, it's the same word for before you that I would use if I were talking to you.
Atah?
Well, it's before you, it's the word for before with the ending you on the end of it. I'll tell you why I did it. When I got down to the line that says, from what wild unruly scriptures of stars that are born and fade, how long does it take for a star to form and to fade? It's an eternity. The only creature that would be around for as long as it takes to make a star, I decided it had to be God, and so I made a capital. I made a capital Y. So let's look at this poem a little bit more carefully. You see that he runs through different characters in the Bible. King David, who played the harp and is a poet and sings the Psalms, and Elijah, who goes to heaven in a chariot of fire, and so on. And then, wait a minute. And then we get to this paragraph here, and you see that we've got incense because we're now in a Catholic scene, and it's Jesus with a yellow star. When I read that, I realized this was a poem about the Holocaust. And he's not the only poet who, in their poems, imagine Jesus coming back to Europe during the years of the Holocaust. It's an incredible idea. The idea is that if Jesus came back, that the Nazis would recognize him as a Jew and kill him too. Shocking. Each one is doing their thing. David sings his poems and so on, and Solomon is the wise man who gives all these proverbs. Fox fables are proverbs, and so on. And finally, we get to the last paragraph. And from what wild, unruly scriptures of stars that born and fade are you? And we're talking to God. He's talking to God. Groping with hands of hardened arteries. So, who has hardened arteries? An older person who is becoming frail, right? And what is God doing? He's going through the Bible, and he's saying, "Uh-oh, did I promise this? I can't do that," and he tears it out. He's tearing out with remorse the unfulfilled promises. What are some of the adjectives that we commonly use to describe God?
Powerful, omniscient.
Omniscient, all-powerful, almighty.
Loving.
Father.
Here, I made a list last night. I'm almighty, omniscient, redeemer, merciful, compassionate, abundant in kindness. These are all phrases, right? He slumbers not or sleeps, right? Our Father who is in heaven. And also the Jews think that God has a special relationship to the Jewish people. Here, thou art holy, and thy name is holy, and so on. Thou didst choose us from among all peoples. Thou didst love and favor us, and thou didst exalt us among all tongues, and sanctify us with thy commandments. This is this notion of the chosen people, which one branch of Judaism, the Reconstructionists, didn't like that idea. They felt that people might say that Jews were saying that they were better than everybody else. I'm talking about especially during the 1930s when the Nazis talked about the master race. And so they have given up this notion of they don't talk about God choosing them in any of their prayers. They've changed the prayers, but the rest of the branches of Judaism still have that. So this poem is saying that the Holocaust happened because God was unable to do anything about it. And here's a quote from Rabbi Harold Kushner, the rabbi who wrote when bad things happen to good people. After the Holocaust, you can believe that God is all powerful or God is all just, but not both. So this poem is saying we have to reconceive what we thought about God. You want to see it again? Or no? Let's go on to the next poem. This next poet, Dan Pagis, is a very interesting poet who himself was a Holocaust survivor and spent, as you see, as a kid, he was in a Nazi concentration camp. A marvelous poet, and I really enjoy translating his poems. Testimony. This poem has to be read with the poem that follows called Other Testimony, and it's a trial, and should I try to zoom this, or you can see it okay? It's a trial, and so here's the first testimony. And who's on trial in this poem? God is on trial. No, they definitely were human beings. In order to read this poem, you have to imagine that it's a dialogue. And there's another person who's asking a question, and the poet answers. So what we can imagine that the other person said, those Nazis, they were not human beings. And he says, no, they definitely were human beings. What's the proof? They had uniforms and boots. You didn't ever see a wolf wearing boots. So then the other guy says, well, wait a minute, if you're a human being, then you're created, we Jews believe that you're created in the image of God. You're going to tell me that the Nazi is created in the image of God? He says, how can it be explained? They were created in an image, just a different kind of an image. This Hebrew word, tselem, image, it has a meaning also of an image, a likeness, or also a pagan idol. He says, I was a shadow. Mine was another creator. He says, I'm invisible now. I'm in the image of an invisible God. A God that you cannot see. And he did not leave me anything which could die. In other words, the Jewish idea of the immortality of the soul. So what we realize now is that this is a dialogue between two disembodied souls who have just been incinerated in a crematorium. Where is this conversation taking place? In the smokestack, as they go up in smoke. He says, and I ascended swiftly, blue, the blue color of the smoke, reconciled. In other words, he must have had some kind of argument with God, and he's no longer angry at God. He says, reconciled, I would say apologetically. Maybe he swore at God, maybe he blasphemed, but now he is apologizing for that. Smoke to smoke omnipotent. He's smoke. If he's in the image of God, then God is also smoke. But God is not an ordinary person, God is all-powerful. a little bit, it's really a harsh joke, isn't it? He calls God smoke omnipotent, who has neither body nor form. Those last lines, has neither body nor form, are a direct quotation from one of the hymns that is recited in the Jewish prayer service in the morning and in the evening, the Yigdal hymn. The Yigdal hymn is a hymn that contains the 13 articles of belief that were promulgated by the Jewish philosopher Maimonides. And you see that number 3 is, he has no semblance of body, nor is he corporeal. The idea that God has no body. Now we get to so this particular testimony exonerates God, right? He gets off the hook. Now we have, same poet, another testimony. This is a hostile testimony. Thou art the first, and thou remainest the last. This is a very sardonic comment. Here it's lifted right out of the morning prayer service. You were always the help of our ancestors, a shield for them and for their children, our deliverer in every generation. Your just decrees extend to the ends of the earth. Can you imagine some Jew in a concentration camp saying the morning prayers and saying something like that? You are in truth Lord of your people, their defender and mighty king. You are the first and you are the last. In other words, you're eternal. You existed before anything, and now you'll exist before at the very end also. But he said, you are the first, and you remain the last. You're the only one left, God. Please turn out the lights. It's a pretty cruel joke. We're all dead thanks to you, God. He goes on in this prayer with the story of the Exodus. You rescued us from Egypt, you redeemed us from the house of bondage, and so on. Right? So, then he moves to a quotation from Deuteronomy. Now, you have to know that. But you would know, for example, if I said to you, 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent. What am I quoting from? Right. So he quotes from Deuteronomy, and he expects the Hebrew reader to recognize it as Deuteronomy. But of course, that's probably reasonable, because people who know Hebrew well enough to read this poem have probably read the Bible or saw the movie. If a case in law should arise for which you have no precedent.
Which movie?
It's a joke. If a case in law should arise for, let's go to the text. So it's Deuteronomy 17:8. If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly go to the place that the Lord your God will have chosen and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, then do that, carry out the verdict. In other words, if you have a difficult case, you go to a higher court, and however they rule, you have to do that. So he says, okay, he says, if a case should arise for which you have no precedent, a lawsuit case, he says, heed my heart. We're supposed to go to a higher court? Okay, I'm the higher court. Heed my heart, so harsh in law. See my affliction. That word affliction is the key word for the Exodus story. God sees the Israelites' affliction when they're enslaved in Egypt, and God saves them. So it's a really loaded sentence when it says, see my affliction. Your collaborators, Michael, Gabriel, those are names of angels, and they're the angels of mercy. Your collaborators take the stand and admit that you said, let us make man. And they replied, Amen. So you're guilty. I told you these are interesting poems. Chaim Hefer, I chose because he was born in Poland, and that's where most of the Jews were killed. And there were Jews who survived, and they survived because they were hidden by non-Jews. To be hidden by a non-Jew and to take care of their needs. Taking care of their needs, if you think about your daily life, means that you have to be fed, you have to have water, you have to go to the bathroom, and something has to be done with that. So think about that. And it's very dangerous. If the Nazis found you, or if a neighbor reported you, you're dead. This poem is called Righteous Gentiles. I hear the title, Righteous Gentiles. That's the term that's used to people who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. And in the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, there's a special area to honor the people who did that. And it's quite a large number. And most of them are from Poland. I hear the title Righteous Gentiles, and I try. I try to think of the people who gave me shelter and hiding. I try to think. I listen and ask, were I in their place, what would I do? If I, in a sea of hatred, facing a world in collapse and flame, would I give a hiding place to an outsider? Would I have been willing, would my family agree to walk the streets in constant dread through all those years? My dreams filled with the heavy, threatening step of the executioners, willing to continue walking between volleys of shots and knife blades and whispered gossip, muttered rumors, and prospecting informants. In my translation, I chose the word prospecting because people who were bumped off, what happened to their possessions? Right? So if a neighbor got rid of his neighbor, then all of the furniture and everything else was taken by that neighbor. So there's this incentive to inform on people. And all this, not for one, but for one single night, not a month, but years. And all this without seeking any reward from the victim, naught but a handshake. And all this is only because man to man must be man. And I ask myself, now and from here, would I have been willing in that terrible war? It was they who stood in battle day after day, who are the righteous in Sodom, for whose sake the world is not destroyed. I haven't got time to talk about that, but there's a Jewish notion that there are 36 righteous people in the entire planet, and because of them, the world is not destroyed. So he's talking about these people as being members of the 36 righteous people. It is they, in the history of my people, people murdered, suffocated, and shot. They were the pillars of mercy and loving kindness on whom the world stands. Before them, before their courage, which still is a mystery to us, we, the Jews, bow our heads in thanks. This poem was written in Yiddish. I translated all the other ones, not this one. She's a very interesting poet. There's a huge body of poetry written during the Holocaust and after it. by Yiddish writers. Of course, they were there, and so it's not surprising that they would have the greatest body of poetry. And some of it some of these poems are ferocious in the way they address God and the way they write about God. A man in St. Paul said to me once, "Don't talk to me about God." You know, there's no God for him. This one's called God of Mercy. She writes in a more plaintive, gentle tone than some of the other ones. Yes.
How do you pronounce her name?
Molodowski. O God of mercy, for the time being, choose another people. We are tired of death, tired of corpses. We have no more prayers. For the time being, choose another people. We have run out of blood for victims. Our houses have been turned into desert. The earth lacks space for tombstones. There are no more lamentations nor songs of woe in the ancient texts. God of mercy, El Chanun, sanctify another land, another Sinai. We have covered every field and stone with ashes and holiness, with our crones and our young, with our infants. We have paid for each letter in your commandments. God of mercy, lift up your fiery brow. Look on the peoples of the world. Let them have the prophecies and holy days who mumble your words at every tongue. Teach them the deeds and the ways of temptation. God of mercy, who give us rough clothing, of shepherds who tend sheep, of blacksmiths at the hammer, of washerwomen, cattle slaughterers, and lower still, O God of mercy, grant us one more blessing. Take back the gift of our separateness. Finally,
Joseph, what did he mean by separateness? What's that last?
well, because the Jews have this notion that they are separate from all the other peoples.
Okay.
Their feeling is that they have a special mission, special obligation. They've got the Bible and so on.
All right.
This fellow was a professor of chemistry. As you see, he taught at the Hebrew University, was the dean of the faculty, but he wrote many books look at all these books of poetry that he wrote, all the while that he worked as a university professor of chemistry. This is Avner Trainin, a very interesting poet. This poem takes as its starting point the Joseph story in the Bible. Remember with the coat? The Hebrew word for this coat, by the way, it of course does not mean the coat of many colors, but in Hebrew it's called, it doesn't mean striped coat either, but the Hebrew word in modern Hebrew for this coat means stripes, a coat of stripes. And so he's talking about the striped coat of the people in the concentration camps, the uniforms that they wore. So he's going through the Joseph story and contrasting it with the Jews in the camps. And the brothers did not envy him. You remember the Joseph's brothers, the striped tunic in which they themselves were dressed when unloaded from the rails, the railroad cars. And he did not dream or interpret. And from the sheaves none rose erect, and no goat was dipped as the goat was dipped in blood. And their father is referring to Jacob now. But Jacob's other name, of course, is Israel in the Bible. And their father did not recognize it, for the favorite sons were countless. He could but stammer, beast, wild beast, and saw them nevermore. Well, I finished, actually. Becky,
Perfect timing.
you may want to talk now about some of these poems. We have 3 minutes. If you have any comments, maybe.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us more about Jacob's coat here in that poem?
Just a minute. Since I was here last time, I injured my hearing.
Oh,
I was doing a job that, while not wearing hearing protection, and next day my wife said, "You can't hear a darn thing I'm saying, can you?"
oh no.
So the question was about Joseph's tunic, his coat, and, did the father never see his other sons again? What, I didn't quite.
Oh, in the Bible story? Oh, yes. Sure. In the Genesis story, Joseph goes on to become prime minister of Egypt,
Right.
Henry Kissinger. And the brothers come down to buy grain because there's a worldwide famine and they don't recognize Joseph now. And then in the end they all go back and they bring Jacob back down to Egypt and they settle in Egypt. Anything about the poems?
Very interesting.
Aren't
Very
they?
interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Hebrew poetry is really marvelous, and I can just throw a dart and find something that's good to translate. And I have, this computer is filled with my translations that I've made over the years. And these are just Holocaust ones, but of course they're very, very interesting poems.
Are you making them into a book, or what are you?
Well, so I haven't thought about that. I did have for a while I had a list where people read I send them out, and I had about 200 people, on my list. And every Friday I had the poem of the week, and I used to translate it, work on it during the week, and then Friday afternoon knock it out and send it out. And I did that for a while, but I haven't done it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I had the notion that the Jews would argue with God, even though it's right there in front of you. It just, I never would have made that statement or assumption.
The Jews do argue with God, and there's a whole tradition that goes throughout the generations. As I said, ever since Abraham. You have it in the book of Psalms. You have Psalms where people complain to God, where the hell are you? What have you been doing lately? Of course, there are a lot of disasters in Jewish history, especially during the Crusades. And a lot of poets then write very direct poems. We made a covenant with you. We're keeping our part. What about you? And that's there's a whole book called Arguing with God, which is about that. The literature that reflects the argument with God. Law cases where they take God to court. You sue him. That's what you do when you have a contract that's broken. You sue.
One more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I imagine that the writing of the poetry, especially post-Holocaust, would have been part of the healing for the individual writer. But I'm curious, what sort of distribution did the poetry have, and how many people might it have reached that were also needing that healing?
Yeah. The distribution, of course, among Hebrew readers, which is mainly Israel. The American Jewish community is largely ignorant of Hebrew. It's not completely. I'm here, but but in Israel, of course, you have both Jews and Arabs, 8 million or going on 9 million people who read Hebrew, and Hebrew poetry is very widely read in Israel. The books are sold widely, more so than here. They sell very, very well. So these poets are not. Everybody knows them. They know their names, and some of these poems have been written have been set to music, so they sing the songs. That's very common. I have a list of all the Hebrew poems that have been set to music, and it's vast. So it's a big part of Israeli culture, poetry.
Jonathan, unfortunately our time has come to an end, but please give Jonathan a hand.